Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Soul Land 2 Peerless Tang Men based on novel. So let's start. Huo Yuhao wasn't in a hurry. At least, the Imperial Soul Engineering Legion wouldn't return tonight without an alarm. Therefore, he still had enough time. He didn't enter Radiant City, instead relying on his spiritual interference domain and imitation, as he hid behind a large tree, opened a spectral gate, and returned to his spectral demiplane. Huo Yuhao had already informed everyone about the plan, so all 3 Soul Engineer Legions had made their preparations to take off inside his spectral demiplane. Huo Yuhao immediately called a meeting once he returned, and gathered all the Tang sect's senior members. Huo Yuhao didn't tell Bei Bei that he had discovered the Blue-Silver Emperor's whereabouts. Now was not the time to tell him about that, because it would affect his mood. Huo Yuhao simply told everyone what he had discovered in his surveillance of Radiant City. Everyone's faces turned black as they listened to his description, and that was especially so when they heard Huo Yuhao describe the Imperial Soul Engineering Legion. This is more troublesome than we thought, Bei Bei frowned as he spoke. The Sun Moon Empire can't possibly guess our plan, but Radiant City's defenses are probably already at their weakest. This is the Sun Moon Empire's capital, and their defenses are undoubtedly tight and strict. Judging by the current situation, it'll be very difficult for us to cause any significant losses to Radiant City. It's hard for us not to be discovered even with your spiritual interference domain, unless we can destroy the aerial surveillance soul tools around Radiant City as soon as possible. But if we do that, the city will be warned. Huo Yuhao nodded and said, "It is quite difficult to destroy the aerial surveillance soul tools around Radiant City, because they are all linked to a soul tool front beneath them. That enormous soul tool front will attempt to intercept as soon as an attack is discovered." Shu Sanxia said, "It is hard for us to succeed with the current situation. Why don't we choose another target? Even if we don't attack Radiant City, I believe that they will bring their armies back as long as we can cause utter chaos within the Sun Moon Empire." Huo Yuhao shook his head and said, "The Sun Moon Empire is already placing a lot of emphasis on us. The only thing is they don't understand how we operate. This opportunity will only come once in a blue moon, and the Sun Moon Empire will be a lot less mobile without the Imperial Soul Engineer Legion around. The Sun Moon Empire losing their flexibility and mobility gives us a chance to retreat. Therefore, we cannot give up this opportunity, no matter what. We will never know when another opportunity like this will arise again." Bei Bei smiled faintly at Huo Yuhao and said, "Seems like you already have a plan, little junior brother. How do we go about it?" Huo Yuhao's eyes closed into slits. "We have to start from those aerial surveillance soul tools. Aerial surveillance soul tools are very expensive, and destroying one will already give the Sun Moon Empire some heartache. Furthermore, we can only complete our ambush by destroying those aerial surveillance soul tools. My plan is as such." Huo Yuhao briefly explained what he was thinking. Everyone nodded as they listened to his description, but Tang Wutong was the only one who frowned. "That's too dangerous, Yuhao. If you're discovered, you will be immediately attacked by linked soul tools. Even though we all trust in your ability, those linked soul tools' offensive powers are far too strong." Huo Yuhao replied, "I wouldn't have the confidence before getting Li Ya as my spirit, because the Sun Moon Empire has advanced their research into spiritual detectors. But fusing with Li Ya has elevated my spiritual power to a much more intricate level, and I can mask and imitate everything around me more perfectly. This means that the Sun Moon Empire's surveillance soul tools will have a hard time detecting me, while only spiritual detectors can do that in the first place. However, the greatest problem with a spiritual detector is its range. I can tell from the Sun Moon Empire's current deployment of spiritual detectors that their current research product only has a range of about 500 meters. Under such circumstances, I can just do what I need to do high in the sky, and target those aerial surveillance soul tools and ignore the low-altitude ones, and they won't discover me. Those aerial surveillance soul tools linking together with the soul tool front on the ground is most effective, because there's sufficient space for the soul tool front to intercept any attacks against them. Those low-altitude surveillance soul tools are a lot easier to deal with. Everyone nodded continuously as they listened to Huo Yuhao's convincing discussion. Tang Wutong was the only one who still had some hesitation in her eyes as she stared at him. All right, since that's the case, it's settled. You have to be careful, Yuhao. Nobody can help you on this, and you have to prioritize your safety above everything else. You have to leave as soon as something goes wrong. At most, we'll just abandon this opportunity altogether. Bei Bei reminded Huo Yuhao. Huo Yuhao nodded. Don't worry, eldest senior brother. I will be as careful as I can. The Sun Moon Empire is too confident in their aerial surveillance soul tools. After this mission, they will realize that we aren't moving quickly from place to place by sea, and they will be confused about our abilities. Since that's the case, we shall give them a good one this time. Tang Wutong arrived beside Huo Yuhao and said, let me go with you. We can back each other up if we're together. Huo Yuhao shook his head. No, Wutong. It's different this time. I'll be more flexible by myself, and I won't be discovered so easily. With my current spiritual power, it's likely that I won't be discovered even if spiritual detectors sweep over me. But if you're around, the spiritual detectors and oscillation detectors can easily spot you if they sweep over you. Don't worry, I'll be careful. Tang Wutong quietly reached out and pinched his waist as she glared at him threateningly. Huo Yuhao's facial muscles twitched. Don't worry, I'll be as careful as I can possibly be for you. Tang Wutong gently leaned into his arm. I'll be waiting for you. Be careful. Yes. Huo Yuhao pulled Hikaitu with him and went straight over to the warehouses. Bei Bei immediately gathered the 3 Soul Engineer Legions and prepared for battle. He ordered the Heavy Artillery Soul Engineer Legion and the Tang Sect Soul Engineer Legion over to the warehouses to shift something. The sky had already turned completely dark when Huo Yuhao came out of the spectral demoplane an hour later. He gazed at Radiant City in the distance, and he could see light and fire across thousands of homes. He had to concede that this city, which was the largest one on the continent, would leave a very deep impression on anybody coming here for the first time. The city's scenes at night were the most beautiful that Huo Yuhao had ever seen. Huo Yuhao heaved a faint sigh. I'm sorry, Radiant City's peace is destined to be broken tonight. Huo Yuhao already had his icy war god's armor on by now. He used his spiritual power to control the dark blue hues so that they didn't shine, and his entire body seemed to disappear into the night sky. Not a single trace of his armor's intense chills was released. Huo Yuhao would be extremely careful even without Tang Wutong's reminder. His life and death was linked to the 3 Soul Engineer Legions, because his spectral demoplane was a double-edged sword. If Huo Yuhao was alive, everyone inside his spectral demoplane could become an army of ghost soldiers, but if he died, then everyone in the Tang sect and the 3 Soul Engineer Legions would never leave his spectral demoplane. This wasn't because he didn't want to release everyone before he came out. They were too close to Radiant City, and everyone would be easily discovered if they came outside. Therefore, he had to take this risk. He wasn't taking this risk for himself. He was representing several thousand soul engineers. He was also representing the Doluo continent's last hope. He didn't have a choice not to be careful. With his icy war god's armor, Huo Yuhao could vividly feel thick soul power flowing through the armor and entering his body continuously. The armor was almost like part of his skin, and perhaps even part of his skeleton. He didn't feel any discomfort or difference, besides the fact that his entire body became a little fatter. Huo Yuhao controlling the icy war god's armor was different from when the Snow Empress was doing it. The reason was because unleashing this human-shaped soul tool's full potential required Huo Yuhao's spiritual power. The Snow Empress didn't understand it enough, so she could only use it to amplify her abilities and defend herself. The armor's wings gradually opened behind it. It was a Class 9 soul tool, but it was different from Huo Yuhao's flying-shaped soul tool. The icy war god's armor didn't consume Huo Yuhao's own soul power, so it could take him over 7,000 meters in the air. This fact alone was something that no other soul tool in the world could achieve. There were 2 great dangers at high altitudes, lower temperatures and thin air. The icy war god's armor negated the extreme cold's effects, and the armor itself could absorb energy from the low temperatures around it and feed that energy back to Huo Yuhao. Thin air was fatal to other soul masters, and was a condition they couldn't recover from. But that wasn't a problem for the icy war god's armor. Huo Yuhao had already attempted to go beyond 10,000 meters in the sky with this human-shaped soul tool. That was an entirely different world, and he wouldn't fall even if he didn't use any soul power to control himself. He would just be hovering in very thin air, and that feeling was both mystical and frightening at the same time. Huo Yuhao didn't know if he was the first human to fly at such a height, but he didn't see any other living beings at that altitude. He tapped his feet against the ground as his wings blasted off. He used his spiritual detection to open a path under the cover of imitation, and surged into the air in the moment when there weren't any surveillance soul tools sweeping his path. The icy war god's armor's energy was all contained inside it, and Huo Yuhao didn't have to release any soul power at all for his armor to take him high into the sky. What he needed was to communicate with his armor through his consciousness. Huo Yuhao reached 1,000 meters in the blink of an eye. Most low-altitude surveillance soul tools were no longer effective at this height, but Huo Yuhao was going even higher. 2,000 meters, 3,000 meters, 4,000 meters, 5,000 meters. He went all the way to 6,000 meters, before he controlled his armor to stabilize himself as he hovered in midair. The temperature at an altitude of 6,000 meters was very low, but such low temperatures were considered a good source of replenishment for the icy war god's armor. The thin air was filled with elements of ice, which the icy war god's armor processed to replenish the energy that it expended before it stored the energy that it was absorbing, compressed it, and fed back a portion of it to Huo Yuhao. Huo Yuhao was full of admiration for this armor. "I'm like a transcendent Doluor with this armor on. Even though the Sun Moon Empire has already produced human-shaped soul tools, mine is crafted from unrivaled materials, and it has cost teacher Xian many years of thought and effort. This superhuman-shaped soul tool is also crafted from the Tang sect's mechanical technology, so the Sun Moon Empire's human-shaped soul tools are still relatively weaker." Huo Yuhao was already starting to move as he thought. His spiritual detection expanded as far as he could push it. He was 6,000 meters in the sky, and he didn't believe that the Sun Moon Empire could place any spiritual barriers at this height. Not even high-altitude aerial surveillance soul tools could be placed at this height. But Huo Yuhao was still full of praises for the capabilities of the Sun Moon Empire's aerial surveillance soul tools. At least, he discovered that there were still aerial surveillance soul tools 5,000 meters in the sky, and even though there weren't many, every single one was relatively large, and their construction was extremely intricate and sophisticated. If not for his mission, Huo Yuhao would really want to take one back to study it. Huo Yuhao floated forward, and the first things he went for were those high-altitude aerial surveillance soul tools that were flying around 5,000 meters in the sky. He observed quietly for a few moments, and he could already tell what kind of soul tool they were. These are clearly satellites. They were used for transmissions and communication, and they were enormous. They could transmit all kinds of information within 250 kilometers, and as long as there was one such soul tool within 250 kilometers, the Sun Moon Empire would be able to transmit information across long distances. They wouldn't even have a problem communicating at a range of more than 5,000 kilometers. But these satellites didn't possess any offensive or defensive capabilities, and they weren't able to detect anything around them. Huo Yuhao slowly came up to a satellite, as he placed a small round metal piece that was about the size of his palm within a tiny crack. Huo Yuhao was using both imitation and spiritual interference domain at the same time. He activated his personal defenses to the highest possible level to prepare for worst-case scenarios, and his spiritual detection covered a vast area around him from the beginning to the end. He was prepared to retreat at any moment. After all, he wasn't entirely sure about the Sun Moon Empire's surveillance soul tools. The first metal plate was installed successfully without anything changing at all. Huo Yuhao retreated silently after completing his task. He observed for a few moments, and surveyed the surveillance soul tools around him to see if anything was happening. The nearest soul tool front beneath him remained stable and quiet, and he heaved a sigh of relief. The first attempt was most important, because it laid the foundations for what he was about to do next. Huo Yuhao quickly began to shift around in the sky. He wasn't afraid of troubling himself, as the surveillance soul tools 5,000 meters up were furthest away from each other. He didn't move down to the soul tools beneath him to install those metal plates. He installed the metal plates on all the aerial surveillance soul tools above Radiant City at that height, and only then did he fly down to 4,000 meters. He continued in a similar fashion. Even though he was flying very quickly, 3 hours had gone by after he finished installing the metal plates on the aerial surveillance soul tools 3,000 meters up. There were 63 surveillance soul tools of many different kinds 3,000 meters in the sky, and every one was very far from the others. Huo Yuhao also had to be very careful, and that was an important reason why he was taking so long. If he didn't have his icy war god's armor, he would even have to take breaks before continuing. Huo Yuhao's following task was even harder, because there were more than 400 surveillance soul tools of all kinds between an altitude of 500 meters and 1,000 meters. There were around 270 at 1,000 meters, and there were more than 160 at 500 meters. Huo Yuhao planned to forego the surveillance soul tools at 500 meters. He would deal with them later on, but he had to install the metal places on the surveillance soul tools at 1,000 meters. But this altitude was also the most dangerous. The surveillance soul tools hovering at 1,000 meters were inherently extremely powerful, while the surveillance soul tools at 500 meters would sweep both toward the ground and into the air. Therefore, Huo Yuhao had to use spiritual detection to avoid the surveillance soul tools that could discover him as much as possible. Huo Yuhao paused for a little in the air and readjusted his condition. He relaxed for a little before he reduced his spiritual detection's range, which was initially spread over a large area, to a small but intricate area of effect. He kept his spiritual detection's range to around 1,000 meters in diameter, so that he could conduct a more detailed surveillance of all the energy changes around him. This included the surveillance soul tools waves and undulations, and how they were changing. Everything was within his grasp as he drifted down. He didn't cause any disturbance at all as he arrived next to a surveillance soul tool that was patrolling in a pattern. He flicked his wrist dexterously, as he sent another metal plate into a blind spot that the soul tool itself couldn't detect. Huo Yuhao somersaulted in the air with a flash as his flying-type soul tool accelerated, and moved him 100 meters horizontally. He avoided several spiritual surveillance waves as he flew. Huo Yuhao quickly changed directions as he shifted to another side and floated downwards, and he dealt with another surveillance soul tool with yet another dexterous flick of his wrist. Huo Yuhao's understanding of hidden weapons meant he was still confident of doing this properly even if he had to do it over long distances. But doing that was a lot less discreet than going up close to those surveillance soul tools. Huo Yuhao had to be very careful with each installation. He couldn't allow any mistakes at all. He could expose himself with even a tiny error. What he was doing would determine whether his plan could be executed successfully, so how could he afford to be careless? Huo Yuhao was moving a lot faster here than he was at the higher altitudes. He turned, spun, and danced through the air as he stuck metal plates to aerial surveillance soul tools continuously. His movement was like rolling clouds and flowing water as he didn't stop at all, and all those surveillance soul tools had nowhere to hide under his spiritual detection. Anybody who could watch those surveillance waves in the sky would be overwhelmed with admiration at what Huo Yuhao was doing. Every movement and every acceleration zipped through and between dozens of intersecting surveillance waves at the same time. There were some close shaves where Huo Yuhao had to use instant teleportation to avoid them. Even though not every kind of surveillance wave could discover him, Huo Yuhao had to put safety first as he tried his best to keep any wave from touching him. After he completed the last installation, at 1,000 meters, he paused in the air before he accelerated and disappeared beyond the horizon. Huo Yuhao could feel some dizziness in his brain, which was a sign of consuming too much energy. He had consumed too much energy and not spiritual power, because he could still take this with his spiritual power. The sky had turned dark, as most of the lamps and lights that resembled the stars in the night sky had disappeared. Huo Yuhao flew far into the distance and descended to the ground at a relatively obscure and remote area. He crossed his legs and sat down on the ground as he panted deep and heavily. Huo Yuhao's face was a little pale, and his eyes were filled with fatigue. However, there was also excitement in his eyes. Huo Yuhao was entirely certain that nobody else in the Doluo continent could achieve what he had just done. Not even ultimate Doluo could do that. Huo Yuhao looked up at the sky. Even though he couldn't see the surveillance soul tools he had worked on, his eyes were full of satisfaction in this moment. A gorgeous shadow emerged from Huo Yuhao's body. It was Li Yue, the mermaid princess. She sat down beside him just like that, and brought her tail up close and placed her arms around it like a young girl sitting on the ground hugging her knees. A beautiful song could be heard, but Huo Yuhao was the only person who could hear it. Wonderful melodies circled around his spiritual sea, and his fatigue disappeared like silk spun from cocoons. He was recovering all the spiritual power that he had expended at an incredible speed. This wasn't Huo Yuhao's soul skill. Instead, this was the mermaid princess's innate ability. She didn't speak to him, but was just singing so beautifully with a faint smile on her face. Everything was dark around him, but it was also quiet and tranquil. Huo Yuhao quickly entered meditation, as he listened to Li Yue's song. He was still this mission's main director, and he had to recover what he had expended as quickly as possible. Consuming soul power was nothing much. He hadn't consumed much soul power, because he had his icy war god's armor to replenish him. However, Huo Yuhao needed to rest, because he had used too much spiritual power, and especially so when consuming too much energy made him feel fatigued. Huo Yuhao's soul core absorbed spiritual power continuously as Li Yue sang to him, and that accelerated his regeneration. Huo Yuhao got back to his feet after an hour, and his eyes were already full of life and vigor. Li Yue didn't go back into his body. Instead, she just hovered quietly beside him. Huo Yuhao raised his right hand as deep chanting sounds could be heard, and a grey soul ring appeared on his body. This wasn't the first time that Li Yue had seen his grey soul ring, so she didn't feel conflicted or resistant at all. Huo Yuhao was in such a state when he completed the contract with her after all. This ring was evil, filled with light and a little strange, but she was slowly starting to accept it. Huo Yuhao had begun to chant his spell, and deep and dull incantations rang out. Huo Yuhao used imitation and spiritual interference domain, so that he could hide Li Yue and himself. Li Yue hovered next to Huo Yuhao, and a mystical scene occurred. Soul rings appeared from the bottom of her mermaid's tail one after another, and one would realize upon closer inspection that they were the soul rings Huo Yuhao had attached to his spirit eyes, every single one of them. The eighth soul ring, the one that was blood red, glowed as Huo Yuhao's incantations was suddenly mixed with another crisp and bright voice. Every glyph or word that he chanted was accompanied by an identical one in this crisp and bright voice, and this voice belonged to Li Yue. Li Yue was 100,000-year soul beast, and she had given a total of 4 soul skills to Huo Yuhao. 2 were from soul rings, and 2 were from soul bones. The soul skill that she was using on Huo Yuhao's behalf was one from her soul rings, Mermaid's Duet. The reason why his 8 soul rings attached to his spirit eyes would appear on Li Yue's body was because of one of her soul bone skills that she had bestowed on Huo Yuhao, Merfolk Control. Merfolk Control was entirely auxiliary, but it was very effective. It could release a merfolk's spirit when absolutely necessary to control Huo Yuhao's soul skills, and it could unleash his other soul skills on its own while expending only half of the spiritual power normally required. That was just a soul skill. That wasn't just a soul bone for Huo Yuhao as, more importantly, he had Li Yue as his spirit. Therefore, Li Yue using this soul skill meant that she was temporarily controlling his spirit eye's soul skills as his spirit, and the overall effect was undoubtedly superior. Merfolk Control's effect on normal soul masters probably wasn't that evident, but it was very different for Huo Yuhao, because he had twin martial souls. Even though he could switch between his martial souls, switching still required energy. He also couldn't unleash them as quickly as he could when he was in his normal state. But that was different with Merfolk Control. Li Yue could support him according to his whims. When Huo Yuhao was using his Ice Jade Emperor Scorpion in battle, Li Yue could use all kinds of auxiliary spiritual type soul skills to help him. That was like another Huo Yuhao appearing temporarily to fight. He could also save half of his spiritual power when using his Spirit Eyes soul skills. Of course, Huo Yuhao's soul bone would have to consume soul power, as he was conserving spiritual power. However, Merfolk Control couldn't grasp every single soul skill. First, she could only use those spiritual type soul skills. She couldn't use Huo Yuhao's Eye of Destiny, or the Three-Eyed Golden Lion's Destiny Skull's soul skills. This meant that Li Yue couldn't use Spiritual Blast, Destiny's Demise, Spiritual Dispossession, and Destiny's Adjudication, because those had belonged to Wang Chua. When she sacrificed herself for Huo Yuhao, he became the only one who could use her strength. Merfolk's Duet, which was his 8th soul skill, was comparable to Merfolk Control. Merfolk's Duet could double the effects of any of Huo Yuhao's spiritual type soul skills. That didn't include those soul skills that Wang Chua had bestowed on Huo Yuhao, but that was enough. For instance, Huo Yuhao's incantations were considered a spiritual type soul skill, while this was also considered his 3rd martial soul. What was the effect of doubling his necromantic spells' effects? The answer was quickly presented in front of Huo Yuhao. 18 spectral gates quickly opened and spaced out in a line. Huo Yuhao had to strengthen his spiritual interference domain's area of effect, so that he could cover every single gate. Huo Yuhao glanced at Li Yue with a surprised look on his face, and she gave him a sweet smile. Merfolk's Duet only consumed half of what he would normally need for soul power and spiritual power with Merfolk Control. What did 18 spectral gates mean? This meant that Shrek Academy's 3 Soul Engineer Legios could come out and retreat twice as fast as they would have otherwise. Huo Yuhao nodded in Li Yue's direction before he turned towards Radiant City. There was a remote in his hands. The show is about to begin. Huo Yuhao pressed the button on his remote heavily as he spoke. A thread of strange undulations mixed with soul power and spiritual power traveled into the distance. Boom. The silent night sky above Radiant City was suddenly jolted by deafening booms as enormous sparks and flowing lights crackled above Radiant City. The city's peace was disturbed, and ear-piercing alarms could be heard in the next moment as all kinds of surveillance soul tools in the sky were fully activated. Radiant City's 4 large soul tool fronts were also fully activated at the same time. But would that be useful? The corner of Huo Yuhao's mouth curved into a mocking smile as he continued pressing the remote in his hands. Boom, boom, boom. Boom, 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 boom. Intense explosions rang out continuously high in the air, as the loud sounds of those detonations traveled far through the sky. Brilliant fireworks crackled one after another in the sky. The soul engineers within their respective soul tool fronts inside Radiant City were all completely stunned by what they were witnessing. The reason was because they hadn't detected any attacks at all. So why would their aerial surveillance soul tools explode one after another? The screens that those aerial surveillance soul tools were connected to on the ground went black at once as exclamations could be heard in every corner of the city. But that didn't change how those aerial surveillance soul tools were exploding in the sky. The sky above Radiant City was like a magnificent firework show as intricate fireworks crackled again and again. There were many different colors, and there were many different sizes. A vast area of the sky above Radiant City was lit up. Shu Tianran was jolted awake amid the loud explosions. When he rushed out from the royal palace and witnessed the sparks and fireworks in the sky, he froze. What is going on? What exactly has happened? Nobody could answer him. As the aerial surveillance soul tools in the sky continued to explode, Radiant City's defense system was completely activated. Soul engineers got to their battle stations and posts as they tried to control all kinds of surveillance soul tools and attempt to discover some trace of what was happening. But the explosions in the sky didn't seem like they were going to stop at all. Radiant City couldn't get anything from their monitoring. The only thing they could get was darkness in that instant after the explosion. Radiant City was destined to be overwhelmed by darkness this night. The royal palace's linked defenses were activated as those terrifying explosions continued, covering the entire palace. The 4 Soul Tool fronts didn't activate their defenses, because they would have to use their high-powered compression array Soul Tools if they did. They had expended much from the last time they used it, and they couldn't even activate it again. They had to conserve power so that they could defend the Soul Tool fronts. At a time like this, who would care about the citizens? Everything had happened too abruptly, to the point where Radiant City's Imperial Guard couldn't react in time. The entire city descended into chaos amid the explosions in the sky that were like rolling thunder. Radiant City had become completely blind, and that was Huo Yuhao's first step. Just as those explosions were happening, Zhuge divine crossbow cannons were swiftly pushed out from those 18 black spectral gates one after another. The Soul Engineers didn't make a sound at all, but when they saw the brilliant fireworks that were lighting up the sky in the distance, they opened their mouths in shock. They almost didn't know where they were, but this firework show was the grandest one they had ever witnessed in their lifetimes. A cold dash of light flickered across Huo Yuhao's face. He withdrew the remote in his hands. The first step was the most important one, and he finally completed this task that he had spent so much energy and almost half of the entire night on. Huo Yuhao shared spiritual detection with everyone and relayed his instructions. 300 Zhuge divine crossbow cannons formed up in a single line as they quickly got into formation. After the Heavy Artillery Soul Engineer Legion came out, the 4th Soul Engineer Legion's Soul Masters and the Tang Sect Soul Engineer Legion's Soul Masters quickly rushed out from those 18 spectral gates. The 4th Soul Engineer Legion's Soul Engineers didn't appear with their forts. Most of them were pushing some heavy soul tools as they appeared beside the Heavy Artillery Soul Engineer Legion. They quickly set those soul tools up, and He Kai-Tu was their commander. The Tang Sect Soul Engineer Legion's Soul Engineers were wearing their equipment and supporting the other 2 legions from one side, and everyone nervously got to work. Huo Yuhao closed his eyes and regulated his breathing as he listened quietly to the explosions in the sky. Tang Wutong, Bei Bei, Shu Sansha, Jiang Nan Nan, Xiao Xiao, and the rest of the Tang Sect's senior members arrived beside him as they gazed into the distance. Everyone's eyes flowed with astonishment and respect as they witnessed the magnificent fireworks in the sky. Huo Yuhao had accomplished this by himself. He was like the Sun Moon Empire's nightmare, and he made what was impossible possible. He could still find loopholes and weaknesses in Radiant City's airtight defenses. The explosions far in the sky finally stopped after about a dozen minutes. Metal fragments and dust fell from the sky as dense smoke covered the entire city. Radiant City was dark before, but the entire city lit up once more as the city's defense army was mobilized. They increased their vigilance and defenses across the city, and activated their backup aerial surveillance soul tools and released them into the air. The royal palace's linked defensive barrier was still being maintained. But right at this moment, the Heavy Artillery Soul Engineer Legion's 300 Zhuge divine crossbow cannons divided into 3 rows, as they formed up behind Huo Yuhao. The dark cannons emanated sinister auras, and every single Soul Engineer's breathing was rough and heavy. The stunning scenes of the night far in the distance had already told them where they were, and those who were smarter could already figure out what had just happened. This video will end here.